Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session of International Intrigues webinar. We've got here an absolute rock star, Casey Handmer, joining us from SoCal today. He's going to be talking to us about the future of energy as his startup Terraform Industries scales up making natural gas, plus just about, I think, any other industrial output out of just sunlight and air. So today we've got Casey with us to talk for the next little while and explore the story behind Terraform and the challenges that facing, today's clean energy solutions and how decarbonizing the industry might shape our world ahead. Now, here at Intrigue, if you're not familiar, International Intrigue is a geopolitics briefing that we send out each day, focused on the future of tech, geopolitics, and business. We think a lot here about the future of the world. And so, of course, one of these concerns and a lot of the sort of undercurrents with geopolitics is energy and the future of energy security. So I think with that and also our perpetual curiosity, we were so thrilled that you actually said yes to our request, Casey, and we're able to have you here to speak to us. So for those who are not familiar with Casey, I want to do a really brief bio because this is like Casey's bio is like what every Asian mother aspires for their kid to have, right? I'm never going to show my mom your bio. That's for one. But for Casey, Casey has a PhD in physics from Caltech and founded Terraform Industries in 2021 during COVID, I think similar to sort of Intrigue's timeline, after working on space exploration at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and transport tech at Hyperloop One. A prolific writer and thinker, Handmer's work now focuses on future-proofing unconditional energy abundance for humanity. And Casey is now a dual US and Australian citizen and based in Los Angeles. Welcome, Casey.
Well, thank you for that suspiciously grudging introduction. It's great to be here.
It's true what I've said about Asian mothers, by the way, but that's
I
okay.
know, I know. I was two-thirds of the non-Asians in my high school math class.
Yeah, probably. I'm sure they've got similar thoughts there. Casey, just to get us warmed up, you've obviously done a lot in your life. With Intrigue, we've got readers from all around the world. So you've seen probably half the world. What is one country you're still itching to visit and why?
Oh my goodness. I've never been to Antarctica or South America or Africa. So like, it's kind of lazy. In my defense, I had no money and I was starting in Australia. And so I got to Southeast Asia first and then Europe. But um, actually, Iran is a place that I'd always planned to visit, and Syria as well prior to the civil war there. And I guess like the moral of the story is if you have the means and the opportunity to travel to a place,
Yeah.
especially when you're young, you should
Hmm.
definitely do it. I definitely did it. I went to all kinds of places that I would really not be able to go now for all kinds of
Yeah.
reasons,
Yeah.
um, either because of instability or because there's information in my brain that those governments might want to get out of it. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, it's much easier to suffer when you're 19 than when you're 37 with kids.
Correct. I think, if you've got the option of a hostel versus a different option
Oh,
these days.
hostel would have been nice. That was like
Yeah.
once a week luxury. I'm talking like sleeping in dishes. Um,
Oh, fantastic. We can come back to that discussion later on. I feel like folks want to learn more about that too. I mean, I want to get into your personal journey as well, Casey. But before that, my last part of this sort of, icebreaker is, do you have a favorite physics theorem that translates into other parts of your life? So borrowing your sort of studies from physics into other parts of your life.
yeah, I mean, if you'll indulge me for 1 minute, um,
Sure.
there are many beautiful aspects of physics, and I'm kind of halfway through developing a textbook based on my perception of that aesthetic beauty. Uh, Yet another project. The thing that's really powerful about physics, something that Elon goes on about as well, is it allows you to reason from first principles, and it encourages you to reason backwards to first principles. And those two things, being able to see an issue both forwards and backwards, are super
Mhm.
powerful because it allows you to kind of independently test for consistency within a worldview, which gets you it doesn't get you necessarily to the answer. It gets you a lot further from ignorance. It allows you to extrapolate a lot further from what we know for sure, to kind of things that can give you important hints and insights into what will occur in the future.
I love that. I think that's a really great takeaway from that. Casey, now you've worked on huge, big priority projects like transport tech and space exploration. How did you end up here doing this? For our readers who are a lot of humanities background folks. And then what inspired you eventually to ditch NASA and then found a startup in energy tech?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to always be pretty good at the quote unquote hard sciences, analytics, math. I've always had an interest in computing, although I don't think of myself as a particularly talented computer programmer, especially compared to the AIs that are available now. Um, but it's given me the freedom to recover from, you know, basically committing career suicide 4 or 5 times, and to encourage our listeners here to validate my mistakes by repeating them. So that's good. Yeah, I think at NASA I just realized that I'd done what I'd set out to do there, and I kind of had to choose whether I was going to be a lifer and
Mm.
stay there until they carried me away in a box, or if I was going to go out into quote unquote real world and do something new.
Yeah, and that's very inspiring for folks. So I'm sure in every industry there's an element of, do I stay with this and go the whole 9 yards, or do I sort of try and pivot mid-career into something else? I think that's something that a lot of us at Intrigue and the founding team had dealt with too. Now let's get into Terraform, because I think, prior to actually meeting you, I had heard of Terraform in a really cool setting about climate tech. So can you explain how the scientific process works to some of our readers who are not familiar? So I know that with Terraform, you're on a mission to make fuel out of thin air. But, explain it to me like I'm five. How does that work?
Well, I mean, when you woke up this morning and you ate your cornflakes, right? That's fuel for your body that
Hmm.
is chemically not that different to gasoline or petrol, uh, and and it came out of thin air. Like the volume of the mass of the crops that we eat and the trees that grow in the grass and whatnot, that is they're made of cellulose and sugars, which is made of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, which comes out of water, which falls from the sky, and CO2, which ultimately comes out of volcanoes and our cars' exhaust pipes,
Hmm.
and forms kind of condenses out of the air in a way into a living thing. So it's not that revolutionary. The $1 million question is, you know, with a lot of effort, you can grow enough cornflakes to survive by yourself. With a machine, it's pretty easy, but that's using fuel. Um,
Yep.
and and so, is it possible for us to use the bounty of the sun, which dumps a kilowatt per square meter on every inch of the Earth's surface constantly, um, to to basically do the same kind of cut out the middleman, don't go underground for 100 million years, just get straight to fuel,
Hmm.
with the benefit of science and technology. Corn is an amazing plant. Don't get me wrong. Corn chips are probably my greatest vice, um, but in terms of the embodied energy you get out compared to the sunlight that falls on it, it's well under 1%. Right?
Right.
It's horrendously inefficient use of land. Humanity has taken basically all the good land on Earth and put crops on it. Um,
Hmm.
and and so it turns out that solar photovoltaic panels plus a synthetic fuel process like the one we're developing here at Terraform,
Hmm.
about 100 times more energetically efficient in terms of area than agriculture, which is a number you want to hear, right? Because that means that
Right.
even though in this kind of post-industrial world or post-industrial revolution world, we all consume 50 or 100 times more energy, via our electricity bill and via our gasoline consumption than we do via our cornflake consumption. We can still meet that need using an electrical photovoltaic system because the efficiency of production is much higher. So actually, you don't need 20 Earths worth of land, which you would need if you were determined to do, say, biofuel production, for example.
Right. Right.
This is a critically important thing and also quite subtle. Um, but just to kind of give your listeners the breakdown, roughly one
Yes.
third of Earth's land surface area is uninhabited desert, and by uninhabited I mean maybe there's like one person per square mile or something, but like it's not
Hmm.
economically productive. Um, and you need something like 2 or 3% of that desert land under solar arrays, which ironically has the effect of reversing desertification because it increases shade of the surface. So
Hmm.
like we're talking like how do we turn back the desertification of the Sahara, which has actually mostly occurred during historical time,
Right.
um, in
But then
last
what do
last
you do
2,000
with
years.
that sunlight, right? So I guess the kind of the explain it to me like I'm five thing is like you are using the sort of direct air capture to then split the atoms, right? I don't
I
know. I
mean,
mean, I'm
yeah, I mean it's
overreaching here.
you can just think of it as a black box where you put in air and water and
Yep.
electricity and fuel comes out, and
Hmm.
you can quote unquote trust me because the air and the water going in have the same elements as the fuel that comes out as carbon and hydrogen, right? So I'm not
Okay.
like it's not a nuclear reactor, and and the amount of electricity that goes in is about 3 times more than the amount of fuel energy that comes out. So it's not a perpetual motion machine, right? So like on that basis, you're like, yeah, this seems legit. I can can kind of delve into the details here a little bit, but I just want to make it clear that like no miracles are occurring here. Uh,
Yeah.
the newest technology that we're using in terms of like the fundamental science was discovered in the 1800s,
Yeah.
right? Um, Very late 1800s, but 1800s. This is old school stuff. Um, there's some subtle reasons why like everything that's been invented more recently is not useful for this. But in any case, this is all old school stuff. So um, in order to actually make this work, there's hundreds of ways of doing this, but the way that we're doing it, which we think is the best
Yep.
way, is we have three separate machines. One of these machines captures carbon dioxide from the air, right? Which is a neat trick to have.
Mm-hmm.
So it concentrates carbon dioxide in the air by about a factor of 2,500 from ambient 400 parts per million up to 99%. That's pretty cool. These machines exist in spacecraft. They exist in medical equipment. They exist in submarines. We have a system that's custom designed for our application, but CO2 scrubbing has been around for a long time. We have a machine that splits water into hydrogen and oxygen. We throw
Okay.
the oxygen overboard. We don't need it. Same way trees do, right?
Yep.
We keep the hydrogen. That's called an electrolyzer,
Mm-hmm.
which is ancient Greek for cutting amber or cutting, cutting with electricity, less literally. That was invented in the 1840s, I think, by Michael Faraday or someone, like old school stuff.
Right.
And we've basically, modernized the design to an extent, but again, old school. And then once you have hydrogen, which is a powerful source of chemical energy, but very difficult to deal with, really, in all kinds of ways, and CO2, you can combine them in much the same way that chloroplasts do in trees, except we're not constrained by the need to keep a tree alive. So we do it in a high temperature, high pressure reactor, which is very much like a Haber-Bosch reactor that's used to make ammonia and fertilizer. These have been around
Yep.
for more than 100 years. Um, and uh, that reaction creates as its waste products methane, which is natural gas, and
Mm-hmm.
water vapor, which we can just condense out and recycle. So uh, the whole reason that I knew about this is that this is the method that we're going to have to use to make synthetic fuel on Mars when we go to Mars and we want to come home,
Right.
because you need fuel to fly either way. And there are
Exactly. You
no,
can't bring it all over there and then bring it back with you, right? It's going to
not
burn
not
up.
easily, and there's no Saudi
Yeah.
Aramco on Mars. So and there's no
It might
naturally
be.
existing oil deposits as far as we know. So like
Yeah.
you have to have a synthetic hydrocarbon supply chain there. So I'd done the
Amazing.
math, and I
Yep.
realized that the thing that makes it difficult on Mars is actually not the technology of the chemical plant; it's the power supply.
Mm-hmm.
But power is actually relatively easy to find here on Earth, and solar power is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper every year. And I was like,
Yeah.
if solar continues to get cheaper, how much cheaper does it have to get before it is easier to put some solar panels outside, hook up
Yeah.
one of our machines, then drill a hole a mile underground? Right? Drilling is really hard work.
Absolutely.
And I
I
ran the
mean,
math, and it's like, yeah, a few years. So like, let's
yeah.
get cracking.
So on that, I mean, you've got existing technologies and existing practices that were discovered, as you said, in the late 20th century, effectively, right? And you're using that and kind of
19th.
recalibrating it in a way that's profitable as well as bringing, I guess, synthetic fuels into the world. Now, you also had just mentioned this thing about solar power and how sort of abundant it is. You also predicted that by 2042, I think,
Mm-hmm.
95% of humanity's energy usage will be downstream of solar. So can you talk us more through that and sort of what that means?
Well, so the food that you consume is solar power, so that's
Hmm.
taken care of. And then the the next most energy you consume is electricity through the outlets and power points in your house, and also indirectly through things like internet services, industrial refrigeration, and so on.
Hmm.
That's delivered through the grid, and the grid is like the solar is growing like by leaps and bounds in terms of fundamental grid supply in every country on Earth. I mean,
Yeah.
like in some ways, Pakistan is a leader here because their grid, their existing grid and its ability to deliver power is so poorly maintained and administered that individual businesses and homeowners and so on are just putting solar and batteries in their houses because it's more cost effective than having a generator, and
Hmm.
it's a real pain in the ass to have like 5 blackouts a week. So, um, right. And in places with better administered grids, the cost delta is not quite as extreme. But even so, like in Germany, for example, it is you can just like basically buy off the German equivalent of Walmart an 800-watt solar panel and a battery and just put it out in your balcony in your like small Berlin apartment and plug it in. And just that itself like drastically reduces the amount of net power that you consume, um,
Hmm.
and saves you a lot of money. Even UK, which is the only major country, industrialized country, which will not be able to cut completely over to solar because it's too far from the equator and has too many people and too much industry, um, is growing solar by leaps and bounds. China is installing, I can't remember the latest numbers. It's like tens and tens of gigawatts per month of
Yeah.
solar. Right, this is a big deal. We'll probably come back to this later.
Yep. We
Even the
will.
United States, which has tried to legislate and regulate progress of any kind out of existence, is installing solar at a fabulous rate. And the reason for that is it's just getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper over time. And I don't think that's going to slow down. So I think it's going to be very clear that that solar will basically natural gas and solar have pushed coal out of the US electrical grid.
Hmm.
Um, Nuclear is not going anywhere, but it's certainly not growing. So that'll continue to stay there. Um, and and then ultimately, like solar is in the process now of beating gas. Solar and batteries are like beating gas in the leading market. So it's pretty clear what the outcome is going to be there. And so solar will easily get to like 70, 80, 90% of the grid in the next 15 years. But
Wow.
that doesn't get you quite to 95%. So then how do you get to 95%? Well, you see enormous growth in hydrocarbon consumption, and all that growth is downstream of synthetic fuel. And at the same time, almost all of so the world consumes about 100 million barrels of oil a day, and a large fraction of that is made in the United States with fracking. But
Mhm.
fracking wells go off after like a year or two. So
Yeah.
unless you're refracking, you and continue to drill, that can go away very quickly. So once you get to a transition point, hydrocarbon production in first of all markets that import from the United States, which is like Europe and East Asia natural gas, and other parts of the world in terms of gasoline, oil products, and so on, will cut over to a solar synthetic process pretty quickly. China imports something like 12 million barrels of oil a day, so like that's going to cut over to synthetics, and continue to grow from there. And so it's not really doesn't require a crystal ball to see that like all marginal growth of hydrocarbon production, like once you hit cost parity, is going to be on the synthetic side, and then all
Yeah.
the legacy production is going to continue to decline. So that's how that calculation works.
Yeah. And assuming all these calculations are correct, what does the future of Terraform look like? And, I guess that another thing
Well,
that's percolating in my mind is like, if these technologies that you're talking about have been around for such a long time, why hadn't it been done before this?
okay, so to take the second question first,
Yeah.
you need a cheap source of electricity to make this worthwhile, like economically
Hmm.
viable, and solar is just only just got there, and it's
Yeah.
gotten there quicker than anyone thought, right? So like solar costs today are like beyond the most rosy projections that 2012 that in 2012 thought we might get here in like 2200. It's like when your great grandchildren are dying of old age kind of situation, right? So like the future came here way quicker than we thought, and we just get to ride that wave. As far as Terraform goes, um, the calculations are extremely straightforward. Like there is no doubt whatsoever that they are correct. Um, as for Terraform's fate, obviously the future is ours to lose. So we could still screw this up. But even if like there was a horrible earthquake in LA, in 10 minutes time, and every single person associated with Terraform died, and all our data was lost, and so on, like it is mathematically inevitable that other people will work on this. There already are other companies working on this, and they will make it work sooner or later. Just as if Tesla had gone under in 2010, we would still ultimately get electric cars one way or another.
Right.
It's just maybe not quite as quickly.
Right. Or BYDs or Chinese vehicles, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Like, yeah,
mean,
Tesla was not on the critical path of Chinese electric vehicles.
right, exactly, exactly. And on that, I'd love to pivot to US and China as well, and sort of be thinking little bit more about geopolitics and the role of energy security. Um, from where you are in LA, I guess LA is a very special place, and California is a very special place, and a very special place to be looking at both the US and China. So, from where you are, how do you think about the different ways that both countries are actually now approaching the energy transition?
Um, the, so as an adopted American, maybe I've swallowed American exceptionalism hook, line, and sinker too much. Um, but like there
You're
is
not
this
the
meme
only
doing
one.
the
It's
rounds,
okay.
which is like every single time like some key thing turns out to be critical for the future, some farmer in like bumfuck nowhere like stumbles over the world's largest supply of it. And actually, Los Angeles happens to be, as far as I know, the only city on Earth that is, a major city that's collocated with also a major supply of oil. Like,
Right.
like basically, in terms of where oil is on the Earth, it's just like some deity threw darts at a map, and so like a lot of it happens to be in like the middle of Saudi Arabia, where no one has ever lived, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of it happens to be like under the ocean, where no one has ever lived. And also a lot of it happens to be in Southern California, which just happens to be probably the world's premier industrial city, at least in the English-speaking world. Interesting, curious that. Um, so, United States has never really feared for its energy security,
Mm.
um, or actually in kind of critical materials or shortages of any kind. It is even now, I've been here for 15 years. It's really hard for me to get my head around just how much rich the United States is, even
Right.
compared to other rich nations, right?
Yeah.
In
Right.
contrast to that, China is a geographically large country, and it has a large population, and the population is steadily developing. Obviously, there's some demographic concerns there, around aging the population. But China is energy poor for now. But they also have most of the world's factories churning out, a terawatt of new solar PV supply every year. And the United States, in its infinite wisdom, has decided to tariff those solar panels so that it cannot use its superior financial power just to buy them all from the Chinese factories. And instead, the Chinese deploying their own solar panels at a fabulous rate. I'm talking like 100 gigawatts a month, which is pretty extraordinary, right? And so if you kind of look back to the AUKUS caucus and the Quad and so on,
Mm.
when United States, Australia, India, and Japan got together and said, like, we're going to have to figure out how to make sure that China behaves itself in the South China Sea. Well, China is critically dependent on oil that they import, but through the Straits of Malacca and the Straits of Hormuz, but via, let's say, 15 or 20 countries, 90% of whom hate China's guts, and only don't shoot at China's oil tankers because the United States Navy tells them not to, right?
Yeah.
It's a pretty easy problem to solve, which is we control your oil supply, play by our rules or don't play at all. Um, I think if you were Rand Corp right now and you were saying, well, how long is this deal going to last? And quite clearly, like, it was written with Australia's purchase of Virginia-class submarines in mind, which is unlikely to occur before like 2033 or 2034 at the earliest.
Yeah.
I would have my doubts that China would be that dependent on oil imports by 2034.
Right. And that's why I think this is the point of the question, right? I think, if you're comparing the energy transition progress in the US and China, from someone who's working in the industry, how do you sort of see the two countries approaching this and their, adoption rate of clean tech and new energy sources? Because
Well,
you
I mean,
mentioned
China's
like,
just doing an all
in
of the
some
above
ways,
strategy, right? They're also
sorry?
building, China's doing all of the above. They're also building coal plants. They're also building nuclear plants. They're also building solar
Yeah,
plants. In
that's
some
right.
ways, China's approach to this is significantly more capitalist than the US's approach, which is to say it is, up to a constant in bribing local officials, quite clearly a much more efficient market
Hmm.
for deployment of these technologies. And as a result, China will no longer be energy poor. Japan is energy poor. Japan is about as rich as a country can get while being energy poor. Okay, but we've also seen Japan kind of struggle through almost 4 decades of economic malaise.
Mm.
Um, Here's a crazy stat for you, and actually this is interesting because as a kind of married father in my late 30s, I had to choose whether my personality would be based on smoking meat or studying World War II. And World War II, in some ways, like Japan's involvement and attack of the United States in World War II was in part inspired by the United States embargoing Japan's purchases of oil
That's
from
right.
the United States, right? And similarly, Germany's ability to supply their war machine with energy was downstream of their development internally in the 1930s of coal liquefaction technology, which allowed Germany to take its incredible reserves of coal and turn it into a shitty but sufficient form of gasoline. Right? They were able to import a little bit of oil through Romania and Baku, but mostly they were making their own oil out of coal. And until Allied bombing got good enough to take out the synthetic fuel plants, mostly in Leuna, which is on the outskirts of Leipzig, in what then became East Germany. Basically, the kill ratios and so on were very much against Germany, but they were not going to give up until they could no longer fuel their trucks, right, or
Mhm.
fuel their airplanes. Same thing goes for Japan. The war in the Pacific, aircraft, single-engine fighters,
Yeah.
using steadily degrading quality of oil, largely imported from Sumatra, that they then lost the ability to do because of the war in the Pacific, the submarine war in the Pacific, interdicting shipments of oil, which resulted by kind of early 1945 millions of Japanese civilians starving to death. Right, we talk about the tens of
Yeah.
thousands who died in the atomic bombings, but like millions were starving to death by that point. And in some ways, both these wars hinged on critical supplies of energy and oil,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
Okay, so here's a
Energy
crazy stat for
security.
you.
That's why it's such an integral part of, geopolitics for us.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Japan today has a population. Japan's GDP obviously is way higher than it ever was in the 1930s and 40s. Its population is way higher than it was back then. Has aging population issues, but actually the healthiest birth rate of any of the countries in East Asia, like 1.6 or
Not
something.
saying
It's
much,
actually
though. Still very much lower than what it should
it's
be.
about the same as Australia. Like it's not. It's
Oh,
not.
interesting.
Interesting. Okay. They're obviously a few decades ahead on that front, but also Japanese tend to live longer for whatever reason. So uh, about 65% of Japan's land area, just in the four home islands, is undeveloped. It's primarily forested mountains.
Yeah.
Okay. You can put solar panels or wind turbines on those mountains in places where no one ever goes, that no one ever sees. And Japan could be energy self-sufficient, right?
Yeah.
With respect
Oh,
not
that's
only to
incredible.
electricity, but synthetic fuel, right? Now, we had a prospective investor who works with Osaka Gas, right? And when we met with them, we said, we've run the math. You will need 10 terawatts of solar development. And you can put them, a lot of the valleys in Japan are on east-west because it's north-south island chain, right? And you can put them on
Yeah.
the south-facing slopes of these mountains in, these locations in Honshu and these locations and so on. And uh, and you can be self-sufficient with respect to oil with a supply chain that you control completely from silicon refining all the way through to final deployment internally within your own country,
Mm, that's
in 10 years' time.
incredible. I mean, and
And they
that's
have
what I
this
think,
insane double take because if
yeah,
you ask these people, or you ask Estonia, or you ask France, or whatever, they're like, well, we can import natural gas from the United States, but in 10 or 15 years, like who knows? Like what's our plan then? Or from Russia, but in 10 or 15 years, who knows? What's our plan then? But like it is actually
exactly.
possible for any of these industrialized countries to
Yeah.
internalize a like 10,000 year future-proof supply chain for oil and
Yeah.
gas and all critical energy supplies within their own borders with their own technology being run by their own people, right? Which means they're no longer dependent on like, oh no, like an election went a different way than we would have hoped in the United States, and now we're dependent on like gas export terminals being built in Louisiana by contractors we don't control under
Right.
a regulatory regime that we don't control on the other side of an
Yeah.
ocean that we have no navy to patrol. This is like it should be keeping people up at night.
I think it does. I think it actually absolutely is exactly what world leaders think about, Casey. I mean, a lot of them, I think, see your business and sort of like similar businesses as huge opportunities for energy self-sufficiency and energy autonomy, right? And therefore being able to control their own destinies in very simple terms, as you so helpfully outlined for us. Now, turning to the rest of the world, like, do you think other big corporate players or even sort of world powers from, say, the Gulf, Russia, and beyond see your technology as, instead of an opportunity, a threat to their interests?
No, so that's a good question. When I started this company almost 4 years ago, I thought we'll probably get an easy reception from the like granola chomping coastal liberal elite, but
Yeah.
in Texas they'll probably be not interested in talking to us. But that's completely not true. The Texans they love energy of all sorts. They are deploying more solar and more batteries in California is by far, like 10 times more. They are deeply
Wow.
pragmatic and sober business people, right? Like
Hmm.
cigar chomping, gun shooting, Republican voting, God loving, energy loving,
God fearing,
pragmatists.
probably.
My kind of people, in other words, like they understand that like the American freedom and the good old American bald eagle very much enjoy 50 barrels of oil per person per year consumption kind of statistics, which is about 5 times higher than the developed world average. Um,
Yeah, it's
and so
mind-boggling.
and so these people they understand that like drilling is not going to last forever, and they understand that it's a bad business to be in, right? Like the risk involved in oil drilling, about $100 million just to stay in business, and a lot of oil drilling in the United States is done by kind of mar and par independent businesses. It's not a nationalized thing. There's just been an absolute bloodbath these last 12 years ever since fracking, right? A lot of consolidation, a lot of people losing everything basically. And you're saying, well,
Mm,
you're telling me that in most of Texas, which is essentially infinitely sunny and almost no water, all I have to do is put solar panels out, which has a 100% chance of success, right? It's not like
yeah,
we're going to deploy the solar panels and then find that like they put them in upside down or something, right? It's like where you drill a hole, there's like a 75% chance nothing comes out. So you
yeah,
spend $10 million to get nothing, three-quarters of the time. Um, you put the solar panels out and then you hook up a machine, and if it goes wrong, you can just walk up to it and like change a part out, right? And compared to a fracking rig, which is like driving
Much
fracking
lower
fluids
risk.
down underground at 10,000 psi. This is very, very banal stuff, right?
Yep.
Um, and it just produces like natural gas, and it's going to do that until like my grandchildren are like 1,000 years old. Like this is incredible technology for them. They're very happy about it. I've never met anyone in the oil drilling business who doesn't think this is great, because of course they all own oil wells and oil fields, and they're all declining. You
Yeah.
can just put solar panels on top of my existing oil wells, and like the EPA will get off my back, and I can continue to produce stuff and use those assets. Great,
On my own
guys,
land as
sign
well,
me up.
right? I have to
Yeah,
say, Casey, the one place I've been learning about this from, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, is Taylor Sheridan's series Oil Man, starring, have you seen that one, Billy Bob
no, I don't
Thornton?
watch TV, but
You don't
it
watch
sounds like fun.
TV. Okay, we have to come back to that later on. That's probably why you're so successful, and the rest of
My
us
parents
are
were kind of
other
Luddites in that
things.
respect.
But
I never got in the habit of it. I watch a bit of
yeah,
YouTube, but no, I don't have young children and a startup. Like I barely have time to
fair enough. You have a lot going
shave.
on. Anyway, I highly recommend it to our readers if they're interested in sort of just seeing a little bit of that oil industry in the US, contemporary oil industry. But so I guess for our next question, Casey, you'd mentioned a little bit of this, but how do you think, your tech, Terraform's tech, can potentially help energy poor nations achieve complete energy independence? And how do you see this playing out in the next 3 to 5 years? And I know we talked about it in generalities, but would love to sort of go through perhaps each region and how you see it going through, um, sort of playing through, sorry.
Yeah, I mean it's an easy question to answer. In terms of existing energy production, every single nation on Earth is energy poor.
Yeah.
Right? Really, if you wind the clock forward 100 years and look back, you'd be like, okay, Texans were like a little ahead of the rest of us, but like we're all like rubbing sticks together, like energy poor. Um, and every single nation that people like every single part of the world where people live is solar energy rich. By which I mean we're leaving 99.9% of what's available on the table currently, with the exception of the UK. Like
Yeah.
Iceland, obviously, but almost no one lives there. Or like Norway, but it has a shitload of oil already, and
Hmm.
they could continue to drill it and burn it, and it wouldn't make a whit of difference to climate change because the population is so small, right? Like in terms of human population distribution, pretty much everyone lives, like 99.9% of the world's population lives within walking distance of where their great grandparents are able to grow enough food to keep themselves alive. And if that's possible, it means that there's enough solar energy there to run solar arrays to give you roughly 100 to 200 times more energy than your great grandparents had at their disposal,
Hmm.
which is a great quality of life for anyone by modern standards, right? And that's within walking distance of your house. Right? So that's not even taking into account like we go a day and a half's walk away, and now we've got twice as much area to put solar arrays on. And it's not even like something like 20% of Europe is under row crops, another 20% under managed forests.
Hmm.
About 2% of Europe under solar panels would be sufficient to make Europe energy self-sufficient. So and that's not
Wow.
even land that's currently being used for agriculture in like hilariously inefficient Bavarian farms. This is land that's like brownfields, swamps, deserts, mountainous areas that no one lives in, no one goes to. And the solar panels don't care. You can just put them there, and they do the same job. But like this
Very
conventional idea that
interesting.
like, well, Europe is going to have to get its solar power from Africa because Africa is sunny and Europe is cloudy is if I may be crude for a second, it's garbage, right? Like Saudi Arabia has 10,000 times more oil than Germany, right? But it only has about 20% more solar power than Germany, right? And it's a long way away.
Yeah, it is to transfer that energy.
You got it.
Um, yeah, that's fascinating. So where are you? I mean, where is your biggest market, if I can ask?
Well, we're in Southern California. We're going to start here and then
Yeah,
metastasize over the whole world. People sometimes say, well, why don't you go to Texas or something? And maybe we will. But Southern California is a fabulous place to build business.
yeah.
And just our local utility does $20 billion a year in sales. So like, I wouldn't mind banking, double-digit percentage point of that. That would be just fine, I think, to get me started. It's actually kind of funny. SoCal gas is
The
something like
US is your
1% of
biggest
the global
market,
gas market.
right? For now, to
Well,
start
US,
with,
US is about
US
a
and
quarter
then
of the global energy market.
yeah,
So that's a good place to start. But in terms of like catch-up growth, obviously there's a lot of catch-up growth to be had in other well-developed, Western liberal, or at least like approximately liberal, law-abiding countries, um,
yep,
with a clear, evident demand for this sort of technology. And then ultimately, really what I want to do is um, I want to develop this technology and license its manufacture to other companies all over the world. At the end of the day, I don't want to spend 5 years of my life like fighting regulatory regimes in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. I don't think that's a
Yeah.
good use of my time or my team's time. But what we're building, if we're successful, will be about as simple as like bicycle manufacturing. It's the sort of thing that you can actually set up a factory to do in pretty much any nation on Earth. You probably have to import the solar array, the solar panels, but everything else you should be able to do relatively locally in like your
Mhm.
nearest big city, and then deploy from there. And again, that's critical for future-proof energy security and localization of supply chains.
Yep. Amazing. Very excited for you, Casey. I've only got two more questions for you before we turn over to the Q&A section. So, folks who are listening, please get your questions ready. I know there's already two, one question and one comment. So, Casey, this is my, very interesting question for you. You have often noted that there are other questions you'd probably be tackling if there was more than 24 hours in the day, and you obviously don't watch TV anymore. So, what other things, do you think intriguers should be tackling or thinking about? I mean, for me, you've mentioned nuclear before. I think a lot about nuclear fusion and the future of nuclear fusion, which is actually less than 10 years away. But what are some one or two, or maybe you want to comment on nuclear fusion as well, but what are some of the other sort of big problems that humanity is facing that you would like to tackle?
Yeah, I won't be being about fusion here. I'm a physicist by originally, and I think it'd be super cool to have a fusion reactor. I don't think it'll compete with solar photovoltaic power. I don't think that's possible. Um, Immortality.
Mm,
Okay, now, if I may explain this to you, uh, the burden of disease of old age is invisible almost to anyone who's not currently dealing with a dying parent or something, but it
hmm
consumes 15, 20, 30, 40% of our GDP because we've been so successful at stopping people from dying young, which is great, right? Um, but it is probably the single greatest break on cumulative growth over
Yeah.
time. And the NIH in the United States spends about $50 billion a year on medical research. How much of that money is spent on like trying to put the genie back in the bottle for some like late stage Parkinsonian patient or like Alzheimer's patient versus how much is spent on like trying to figure out what is the mechanism of aging and why do humans age 50 times slower than mice? And how do we make that 500 times slower than mice, right? Which would give us all a natural lifespan of 1,000 years and several hundred years in youthful good health. Plenty of time to figure out the rest. Okay. Less than $50 million a year. So less than 0.1% of the overall budget is spent on solving the root problem of degradation and frailty and diseases of old age, which kill 100 million people a year, right? And most of them not ready to go. Most of them suffering terribly. Most of them burdening their families and their communities in ways they don't want to.
Yeah.
It seems insane to me that we have misallocated our public research capital so egregiously in this way. Fortunately, there are a number of startups out there that are trying to work on finding ways to solve this problem. It's obviously a problem that attracts a lot of people. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people get more interested in this when they're in their 50s and 60s and they have less time, maybe less elasticity to like go and solve it. I do not think in retrospect it will turn out to be all that hard. I think that the GLP-1 agonist drugs like Ozempic and friends will, in retrospect, turn out to be the first generation of drugs that are considered anti-aging drugs. I think that they pretty robustly increase the lifespan of even healthy people by a high single-digit percentage point,
Yep.
mostly on the inflammation side. But just all kinds of these are very interesting drugs in all kinds of ways. And I think we will look back when we figure out how to do this, and we'll probably figure out how to do it in the next few decades. We will realize that the molecules that we needed in order to radically slow down people's aging would have been within our reach in a synthetic chemistry perspective since the 1930s. And we will literally
Yeah.
have looked at a century of us aging and dying for no freaking reason at all. And if you think
Yeah.
like, well, if Terraform succeeds, it'll increase GDP by X percentage and, increase human well-being by X percentage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, effects of climate change and impacts of climate change, displacement, uncertainty, all the kind of stuff you guys like talking about. At best, that is like 1% of the benefit of slowing down aging by 10%. Right? If you were just able to come up with a drug that anyone could take that's a couple of bucks, that like aspirin kind of thing, and it slows down aging by 10%, you'll save 10 million lives a year, every year. Right? Isn't that crazy?
That is
Isn't that
crazy. And I
crazy?
think a lot of this stuff can be done with AI as well. I think AI is sort of now building AI scientists to solve a lot of these questions about, either chemistry or biology, synthetic biology. All right. I think we've only got time to turn to the questions actually. So very quickly we'll turn to a few. So we've had a few come through.
Yeah,
One
I
is
can read them
really,
directly if you want, and then just
I
just
mean,
smash straight through them.
Sure. Do you want to go straight to number two, actually? The one they want to challenge you on your claim of 75% chance of drilling a dry well. Can start with that.
Yeah,
You can
okay.
push back on that one and then go to the first one from
I'll take that
invention
one.
methods.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just going here off what Austin Vernon has told me. He knows a lot more about drilling than I do. So typically you'll drill a well, and that might be like five to $10 million, and then you'll kind of have the idea from the geology and the cores coming up that whether it's worth finishing it. And just finishing the fracking well is also like pretty expensive. And then you can actually think of gas. This is in the United States as kind of a manufacturing technology because you have to continue putting in inputs to get outputs back out, which has its advantages and disadvantages. It means you have like fairly predictable production over, say, 18 to 36-month period, but it also means you have pretty high ongoing operating costs. Whereas if you're like punching a hole in the crust 50 years ago into more conventional, not tight gas formation, but like or tight shale formation, but like a more conventional kind of Southern Californian formation and so on. There are gas wells in Southern California that have been just producing incredible amounts of gas 50 years and they're nowhere near running out. So it's kind of a very different model. Ovett Edwards asked about how long until we're selling a viable product at confirmed price. Well, that's $1 million question, isn't it? We're getting closer every day. It turns out to be harder than I thought in all kinds of interesting ways. On the positive side, it turns out I guess we have a moat. Have a flag on the wall that says we do this not because it's easy, but because we thought it was easy. Okay. 75% chance. Yeah, your mileage may vary. I think if you had a technology that guaranteed successful well drilling in gas, then I very much doubt you'd be listening to this podcast. You'd be too busy out there drilling holes. Terraform Mark 1 requires a huge quantity of water to run. Where does the source come from? We actually don't, like, in terms of the chemistry involved, we don't need that much water. We're currently using a lot of water because water is extremely cheap and we need to do a lot of cooling. But if you were operating in an environment that was truly like in a water scarce environment, you can actually condense that water out of the air for about a 10% increase in cost of the final product, which is pretty neat. But again, this is one of these things where like we've taught ourselves that like water is intrinsically scarce. It's not.
Right.
There's no part of California that's more than 350 miles from the ocean, which is literally full of water. You will inexhaustible supply of water. You can never run out. Desalination is cheap. The Israelis figured this out decades ago. You can make a cubic meter of water for 40 cents. 40 cents for a cubic meter of water. That's like
and I mean, as you said,
5 cents for a bathtub.
Direct air capture has also been done in other parts of the world, in subcontinental, sub-Saharan Africa as well. So I think that's not necessarily technology.
Desalination is about 1,000 times more energy efficient than condensation out of the air. But if you have enough energy, whatever.
Sure.
Technology advances into recommendations for clients already in the energy sector, Aramco, ExxonMobil. Look, I don't know. These are huge organizations. We know people at all these organizations. They're generally like pretty happy about us. They like us, but they've also, some of these organizations have gone and like bought carbon engineering and other companies doing mostly biofuels. They haven't all worked out very well. So I suspect, my understanding is that like we are currently not mature enough for them to devote their kind of minimum spend, right? If you're an organization of that scale, you can't really do a $5 million project. You can do a $200 million project, and we're not at the point where that's a useful spend for them yet. But in a year or two, it will be. What is the biggest concern you've heard investors express when approaching them with Terraform's mission? Oh, investors are strange creatures.
They really are.
I don't think I could waste your time with too much answers here, but literally hundreds of questions, and some of them quite good. The ones that break my brain are like, if this is such a good idea, why is no one else doing it? And also, like, you have no moat. And I'm like, well, it has to be one of those two, but it can't be both.
You have no what? Merch?
No
Did you
moat.
say?
Like,
moat.
no,
Yeah, right.
no one can copy you. Key piece of advice you'd give a fellow startup founder. Well, I think actually my advice is probably not very valuable. I would say that like there are some definitely not pleasant parts of the job, but it is important to run towards them, not away from them. You kind of have to make a list of all the things you need to do to succeed, and you can't not do any of them. And in particular, like just to give you a concrete example, you will work with people who you love and admire, and sometimes it'll be time to move them on, and it's extremely painful. But if you don't do it, the company will die. So you have to grit your teeth. Okay, if I'm not wrong, Casey, you expect the price of green hydrogen downstream from a terraformer to be less than $1 USD per kilogram and CO2 under 100 USD per kilogram by 2030. That puts you at around $15 per MMBTU. Your math is very good. This doesn't account for the capex of your Sabatier reactor. No, it doesn't. That's correct. Does this make it competitive in Europe? But what about the US? Yeah, so at that price, you wouldn't really thrill current what's called Henry Hub natural gas price. So there's a couple of factors occurring there. The first is um, that natural gas is kind of artificially cheap in the United States because it's a byproduct of fracking for oil, right? Well, we have to deal with that. The natural gas price is as low as it'll ever be due to inefficiencies in exporting. So the natural gas price will actually kind of correct back up to more like $8 or $9 per MMBTU, which I think is within reach of that. We started with natural gas because it's the easiest thing to make. It is also the hardest thing to, let's say, like totally dominate the marketplace. Like we could take 1% of the US market, which is still worth, on the order of billions of dollars a year. With at our current production price, which is around about $30 per MMBTU. But to get to 99%, we're going to have to push the last cheapest gas well off the market. And that's kind of the final boss battle in a way. So natural gas is the easiest thing to make, but probably the hardest thing to ultimately dominate the entire market with. So the fun thing is there's like 5 or 6 other steel, clean water, ammonia, methanol, and so on that we are in the process of developing, which are somewhat more difficult to make, but will have better economic position. So we kind of get to do all these things and then come back and do the final boss battle against natural gas.
I love that. And with that final boss battle against natural gas, we're going to have to wrap there, Casey. Thank you so much for making time to speak to us and joining Intrigue today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And if you haven't subscribed, please head to www.internationalintrigue.io for your daily briefings. And Casey, thank you so much. I learned so much even just from, researching for this interview and learning more about what you do. Hats off to Terraform. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.